A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds, and after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him. And saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There are a few sermons that I can think of that I can remember decades later. And the best sermon I ever remember hearing live was at the preaching conference that my seminary did while I was in seminary. Now, they had hired one of the greatest preachers in the country, Fred Craddock. His textbook is called Preaching. It's that simple. He is that well known and that respected that he could write a book called Preaching. And that title would be the only title that there is. And Fred Craddock preached, and he gave a great sermon, and I still remember bits and pieces of it. But later on that same evening, a local preacher, Dr. Kenny, who was president of Virginia, the seminary at Virginia Union Seminary, got up and gave a sermon on this passage that I will never forget. And, he gave the usual thing. You may have heard the pithy saying, if you want to walk on water, you have to get out of the boat. And I thought that that's where the sermon would end, because that's where most people's sermons stop on this passage. But he went further, and he likened us to Peter. And that's what I want to share with you today. He talked about how Peter had the faith to tell Jesus that he wanted to get out of the boat. And that was one thing, and it was a great thing. And he actually stepped on the water, and he was able to get out on the water and walk on the water. And then then most people say that, Peter lost his faith. But I want us to look exactly at what it says in the passage. So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. He actually had the faith to get out of the boat, and he had the faith to walk on water. But then he noticed the strong wind, and he became frightened. In other translations of this, it says he saw the wind. Now, you can't see wind. You can see the effects of wind, and that's what caused him to be frightened. I think of the times that we're going through now, and we see all the things that are going on in our society, and it causes a lot of fear if you let it. Fear is a thing that can get hold of us if we see things and we don't have the faith to know that God is bigger than them. And he saw the wind, and he saw the effects of the wind, really, on the clouds swirling, the dark clouds moving so quickly through. He saw the waves on a still lake, like this one. It's a lake. We call it a sea, but it's really a big lake. And the Sea of Galilee there. And he saw the effect of the wind on those waters. And it caused him to be afraid. It caused him to let go of the faith that had him step out of the boat, that had him walking on water. It caused him to think, I can't do this. That's where fear comes in. That's the devil whispering in our ears, you can't do this. And what does Jesus say? Come out and walk on the water. We know that Jesus was where Peter had his faith, because As soon as he begins to sink, he says, "Lord, save me." He doesn't have a lack of faith in Jesus. Where is his lack of faith? His lack of faith is in himself and who God made him to be. God made us to follow him wherever he calls, even if it is to walk on water. And he calls us to have faith, the faith even of a mustard seed, and we can move mountains. Peter's lack of faith was not in Christ, and it wasn't in God. Peter's lack of faith was in Peter. God helped Peter. And for me and for you, maybe that's where our lack of faith lies, of who we are in Christ. May God help us. May God forgive us when we have that lack of faith. We have been provided all that we need. We have abundance. God is God of everything. Why are we afraid? If we're afraid of death, death will come. Death will come for all of us. But Christ is with us. And Christ is Lord of life. And Christ is Lord of the world to come. He sits at the right hand of God the Father. Of what should we be afraid? Nothing. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. I still remember that sermon. I still remember Dr. Kenny imploring us to have faith in who we are in Christ. And brothers and sisters, that's the only word I can give you today. When we have faith to move mountains, when we have faith to step out of the boat, when we have faith to walk on water, we need to have faith in who we are because of whose we are. We need not fear these days. We need not fear, for Christ is always with us. And when the other disciples who did not have the courage or the faith to get out of the boat saw Jesus and Peter get back in, it says the winds ceased. Those things that they were so afraid of just stopped. And then those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And if we believe that to be true, what do we have to fear? Remember that this day, for God is with us. Even out on the lakes, even amidst the storms of life, we have nothing to fear. Thanks be to God.